So be sure and do that with our guest, Bob Chapman. Okay, Bob, I'm going to try to sit back and shut up now because I have a lot of questions for you. Get into where you see the economy going, the real 20% unemployment, where Obama's going, the health care bill, all of it. Bob Chapman.
Well, first of all, the economy. If they do not have a stimulus package additional next year and the banks don't loosen up making loans, and 90% of their loans go to small and medium-sized businesses, and those loans have dropped 16.2% year on year. If they do not have stimulus and they don't have increase in loans to the tune of about 1.4 trillion, 1.6 trillion, somewhere in there, then the economy is going to start to swoon again. And that means that the Fed will be the last bastion of trying to keep the undertow of deflation under control by creating money and credit. And they'll always overcreate, and you can't blame them for that because they want it to be successful. And so consequently, number one, with no stimulus, we will probably see unemployment grow next year to 24-25% from 22.2%. And John Williams has it at 22.1%, so we're on the same page on that. And that will extend further out into the following year, which will be 2011, and it'll get worse. And I would imagine without the stimulus and without increased lending that we'd be going to 25, then to 30 to 35%. And if they do have the stimulus, and that will allow unemployment to stay somewhere between 22 and 23%. And that'll last about another year. So we'll say a year from June, the effects of that will help. But what they're faced with, and of course that would include the increase in loans as well. But what we're faced with here is it's not solving the problem. And the problem is we've got to get rid of the dead wood. We've got to get rid of all of the bankrupt banks and insurance companies and brokerage firms and other corporate entities. They have to be allowed to fail under our system. All of this will continue to put pressure on the dollar. I think before the end of the year, the dollar will, on the USDX, test 71.18 or somewhere between 71 and 72. It'll rally back to 76 or 78, go back down and test again and break, because they have no intention of saving the dollar. They stand up there and say, we want a strong dollar. They don't mean that. They want the dollar weak because it makes them more competitive. And it'll give them maybe 0.5 or 1% or 1% of increased GDP by having the dollar at a lower level.
And they've now reversed the carry trade, but you just dropped that bombshell. You're saying, from the way I heard it, sometime next year they're going to let the dollar completely slide. How low?
Well, on the USDX, which is 75.50 approximately right now, down from 89.5 not too long ago, beginning of May. I think that during the second quarter of next year, that the dollar will break down. And first at 65.60, 55.50, and it could go to 40. And so about a 50% retraction from where we are now in the value and purchasing power of the dollar. And of course, in the meantime, they're gonna be planning to have another Smithsonian type meeting, like the Plaza Accord in '85, the Louvre Accord in '87. And what that means is all the countries are going to get together, and they're going to revalue and devalue all the currencies against one another. And they're also, between countries, going to write off 2/3 of the debt, just like they did in the experiment in Argentina in 1999-2000.
Okay, let's explain what that will do to Main Street and to real estate, starting with, let's say somebody's got a $500,000 house. Inflation would actually be good for them paying it off, except that we're going to have a depression in Main Street. So you've got rising prices, but it's harder to actually make the money. Will the federal government try to go in, wave a magic wand, and when you have a devaluation of the currency, then boost the price of the loans on the houses. So will a $500,000 house note now go to $1 million? Or, I mean, how is that going to work?
Well, I don't think anybody knows outside of the insiders. And what my guess is, logically, if the dollar is devalued, 3 old ones for 1 new one, and I think that's a good perspective. I think it could be close to that. Then one would assume that a $100,000 mortgage would become a $33,000 mortgage. The man who's making $100,000 a year would start making $33,000 a year. The people who have retirement and Social Security, instead of getting $1,000 a month, they get $330 a month. That would be logic. But if these people behind the scenes want to bust everybody, they would keep it up the other level, and everybody would be broke. And then they have everybody running around with pitchforks. Only nowadays we have better weapons than pitchforks. But that's the logical sequence of event, the way it should happen.
Well, here's the problem. We had Dr. Paul Craig Roberts on a few days ago, and he's gone from saying, I don't know if we're going to have dollar death and a depression, to, yes, we're going to have it. The question is it a year from now or 5 years from now? And he said it's going to be road warrior. He said it's going to be what Gerald Celente's saying. He's saying under the current course the establishment's under, and he said there's almost no way to get off of that, even if they tried, that it will be Middle Ages like. That's pretty scary coming from somebody listed as one of the top 7 economists in the world by Forbes.
Well, I've been writing about it since 1968 in that particular venue. And so has Ed Griffin, and so did Gary Allen, and so did Alan Stang, and with the films and records done by Anthony Hilder. And so to us it's nothing new, but to everybody else it is. And yes, that distinct possibility exists. And that's why when people ask, what do? You go out and get dehydrated and freeze-dried foods, you get a filter, and you find something that you can use to defend your family, because it could get that nasty. And if you got money left over, you go out and buy gold and silver coins. And if you get lots more money, you buy gold and silver stocks. And that's it. That's the only defense that you have to try to help yourself.
Okay, well, let's navigate this.
Tell other people, and hopefully they'll come along too. But don't expect more than 1 out of 100 to listen.
Well, earlier in the show, I read a London Telegraph headline here on air saying that the big French bank is basically telling their investors, prepare for total, absolute economic collapse. And so we've gone from will the dollar die to when is it going to die? And we've gone from there could be a total collapse to when is the total collapse coming? Is there any way to navigate out of this, and what do you think the establishment is planning to do?
Well, I think we get a 1207 pass. We immediately start the audit of the Fed. We immediately see within 5 or 6 months what the Fed has been doing since 1913, which is looting the American public and enriching themselves with not only money, with power, and we get rid of them. And if we could accomplish that within a year and a half, then we would be able to go to the people and say, look, this is what the problem is. These are the guys that did it. This is why they did it. And this is why we're not going to put up with it anymore. And so this is what we're going to do. We're going to purge the system of all the losers, and we're going to have a depression. It'll probably last 3 to 5 years. It's going to be miserable. And we're going to do our best that we can to help everybody. But we've got to live through this, and there's no other way. And once it's cleared away, we'll be able to create a new and hopefully more vibrant America. And that's the only real chance that we have. And that's why this legislation was so important. It's the most important legislation perhaps in the last 100 years.
Absolutely, because it identifies the real problem. But
and the culprits.
The culprits, so we can remove the cancer that's already eaten us up, but if we don't go in and have this emergency surgery, we know it's over. If they stay in power, if they're not brought to justice, if they're able to carry this forced vertical integration, this looting through, what will things look like? And when do you think it's going to start descending into total bedlam?
Well, the devaluation of the dollar, which is probably a year and a half away, will be step number one. I would expect at that time or shortly thereafter, the injection of money and credit monetization, the effect of that would start to wane, and we would have inflation perhaps of 30 or 50%, maybe a lot more. I try to be conservative because when you sometimes state facts things that could be facts, people don't want to believe you because it sounds so outrageous. Well, I've been living in an outrageous world for a long time. But anyway, that would be the catalyst, the beginning of the depression, so to speak. And then, we spend a tremendous amount of money on our military forces overseas and all of these things that they've got us involved in. That would cease because the money wouldn't be there to do that anymore. And